Welcome back to Conflicts of Interest. This is episode 293. I'm the host, Kyle Anzalone. Today joined by co-host Connor Freeman. Connor, how you doing?
Doing great, Kyle. How are you?
Doing all right. Allergies today, so a little stuffy here, but going to make it through. Unfortunately for me today, I'm going to just kick it over to you and let you talk about Iran news because there's a lot of very important stuff to talk about when we're talking about the Middle East and particularly the Iran nuclear deal negotiations. But before we get to that, remind people where they can share the show. It's hosted at the Libertarian Institute. We repost the show on the blog at antiwar.com. You can find the show on Twitter at con_interest, and you can donate to the show at Patreon, Subscribestar, and through crypto. All that information in the show notes page. You can also check out the show's sponsor, Paloma Verde, PalomaVerdeCBD.com, promo code PEACE. And, I've been talking with the Oblars who own Paloma Verde, great family-run small business. And, there are more and more listeners buying their products. So, this is, again, helping us to fund the show, keep the show going. And we really appreciate when people donate. Now, they got some new products coming out that I'm going to talk about on the show next week. But, Connor, tell me about what you like at Paloma Verde.
I really like the soft gels. You take them after meals, and they'll hit you in 30 minutes. And whatever you got going on, it'll take care of. It's full spectrum and lasts a long time. Big fan also of the gummies, which are delicious, and those act instantly, and you can carry them with you. They're a little too good. You might eat them a little quicker than you want to. And then also definitely check out the tinctures because this is the heaviest dose, and it lasts a real long time. And I love the mint flavor. And also the doggy treats are fantastic and will really help your dogs if they've got any kind of pain with any kind of joint pain or if they're getting up there in the years. It's just a nice thing to have. So, yeah, definitely check it all out.
Paloma VerdeCBD.com, promo code PEACE. That will save you 20% and it gets the show a kickback. All right, Connor, let's get into the show today. And before we get into the Iran section, I just want to let listeners know that you have a brand new, like within the past hour, I think, article out at the Libertarian Institute titled Israel Murders Iranians While Biden Kills the Iran Deal. And this is a lot of what we've covered on the show the past couple of weeks. So I don't think you're going to go over that article necessarily on the Today Show, keep up with the, the more the current news stories. But that for anybody who, wants some more background on why we are where we are, that's an absolutely fantastic article that Connor has put together. But Connor, let's get into the Iran deal. What's going on?
Yeah, absolutely. All right. So there's new sanctions. So this is from Jason Ditz at antiwar.com on June 16th. U.S. ramps up sanctions on Iran as hope for talks fade. So last Thursday, the Treasury Department announced new sanctions on Iranian petrochemical producers as well as companies in China and the UAE for facilitating and brokering international sales in East Asia. The sanctions focus on a company called Triliance Petrochemical and another called Petrochemical Commercial Company. These companies are said to be the brokers, and 3 Iran-based companies are sanctioned as well for selling them petrochemicals. 2 Hong Kong-based companies were hit with these sanctions for facilitating payments and transactions with Triliance, and 4 companies described as fronts were sanctioned for concealing Triliance's role in purchases and transactions of petrochemicals. They also sanctioned a broker in China and another broker in India for facilitating trade to both of those countries as well. The Treasury officials said that they won a deal, but they threatened more sanctions in the interim, which is what Blinken did the last time new sanctions were announced on the supposed Russian-backed oil smuggling network that funds the Quds Force and all of this, which again also focused on oil trade with China and the UAE. And that was just briefly when Mohammed bin Zayed's brother, Tahoun, the national security advisor, traveled to Tehran last December, or toward the end of last year anyway. One of the first things that once Israel said that was unacceptable, the U.S. really started to ramp up make sure they were tightening sanctions on the UAE for any kind of trade, oil trade that they were still doing with Iran as a way of nipping that in the bud. Now, We have U.S. envoy, Iran's IRGC won't be removed from terror lists. So last Wednesday, the U.S. ambassador to Israel, Thomas Nides, ruled out any possible scenario where the U.S. removes the IRGC from the FTO blacklist. He says the president will not bargain this. Nides also made military threats that all options are on the table. And as the president has said several times, we will not stand aside and allow the Iranians to get nuclear weapons. This is mainly important because it precludes any situation where both sides make concessions over this sticking point for a deal, though this codifies what was apparently already the status quo. Nides also highlighted that the U.S. is working with Tel Aviv to assure Tehran doesn't get nukes. He also said the Arab states as well. Now, Iran is building a new underground nuclear facility in response to Israeli airstrikes. This is from Dave DeCamp at antiwar.com. The New York Times is reporting that the U.S. and Israeli intelligence officials have been monitoring Iran's construction of a large tunnel network underground at Natanz. The report suggests this is an effort to move facilities deep enough underground where Israeli cyber attacks and bunker buster bombs, these would be American bunker buster bombs because the Israelis don't have what they need to carry out that attack yet, although the Americans are trying to sell them to them. But it'll take a couple of years anyway. So, but anyway, it's supposed to protect the facilities from those kinds of bombs and these cyber attacks. Now, the report says attacking these nuclear facilities would require the largest bunker buster bombs the U.S. military possesses. And as I said, Israel does not have them, nor the means to deliver them. Israeli officials cited this hype. The Israeli officials cited in the report hype it as further proof that Tehran is racing toward building a nuclear bomb. Although the U.S. national security officials and Biden administration officials cited in the report say it's not really any cause for concern, and they play it down significantly. Even former CENTCOM chief Frank McKenzie, who is very politically adept and has exploited the phony Iran threat in order to gain, more money and assets and resources for CENTCOM throughout his tenure there. Gareth Porter has a terrific piece about that, going back a couple of years now, I think. But even he plays it down. He says essentially this is just, he goes, they're nuclear. It's just, he goes, they're just trying to gain concessions for sanctions relief and particularly, concessions with respect to their economy. Robert Litwack of the Woodrow Wilson Center is quoted saying Iran is moving closer to becoming a nuclear threshold state. And he says the uranium enrichment program creates an inherent option, a hedge to produce nuclear weapons. But he qualifies this, adding, Iran's move at Natanz amps up pressure on the U.S. to reach a new deal by highlighting the risk of a nuclear breakout should diplomacy fail. So even he's still saying it's just they're just building leverage. The report mentions U.S. and Israeli cyber ops against Natanz, including the Olympic Games, also known as Stuxnet, where hundreds of centrifuges were destroyed, suggesting Iran has understandable motives for seeking further protection at the sites. Biden officials say they've monitored the construction of the new facility for more than a year, and they're not alarmed. It is still many years away from completion. The Biden officials say they believe the immediate purpose is to replace the centrifuge assembly facility Israel blew up in 2020 when insiders penetrated the Iranian program and planted explosives. Quote, the Biden administration says there is plenty of time to deal with the new facility through negotiations and by force if necessary. They assure it is, quote, just another form of pressure on American negotiators. It is still in a nascent phase. It plays no role in how long it would take Iran to build a nuclear. It plays no role in any effort to estimate how long it would take Iran to build a nuclear weapon. The Israeli military and intelligence leaders cited say it is, quote, evidence of a relentless Iranian effort to pursue a bomb capability and justification for accelerated attacks on their nuclear program and the scientists and engineers behind both Iran's nuclear and missile programs. And I'll just add that there's more and more reports, if you look at the Wall Street Journal and this report here and elsewhere, where they go like, where unnamed officials are basically just saying, yeah, Israel is killing a lot of people right now in Iran and ramping up their attacks on their nuclear program and on their drone program as well, as we've been covering. But it's just interesting to see how it's it's not really vague at all in the papers. They just basically say, "Yep, that's what's happening right now." So, Israeli officials say the facility is, quote, very large, much larger than needed to replace the assembly facility that was destroyed 2 years ago. They suggest it would be used to enrich uranium at a mass scale, a claim the U.S. disputes in the report. The U.S. is said to be unconvinced that Tehran intends to enrich uranium at the facility. They suggest rather that it's more clear that Iran's intention is to use the facility to construct centrifuges, rebuilding facilities that the Israelis have destroyed. The Americans are reported to be more concerned with Iran enriching uranium hexafluoride to 60%, as well as their missile and drone programs, which they claim are used against Israeli and Saudi targets. While they say the 60% stockpile built up over the last several months has been concerning, the American officials continue to believe Iran has not taken the steps to build an actual weapon. The report even has a paragraph where they mention the IAEA claims that Iran is, quote, weeks away from the ability to enrich enough bomb-grade fuel to make a bomb, these are referenced, but they're followed with, quote, though fashioning it into a usable weapon could take at least another 2 years, even by the most alarmist Israeli estimates. A spokesman for the Atomic Energy Organization of Iran said Tehran notified the IAEA and informed them about this new construction, even though there is no obligation to do so. They also have pointed out they notified the UN watchdog when they moved when they relocated their Courage nuclear facility to Natanz. This was previously struck in an Israeli drone strike last June. Now, the spokesman, again, also said that Iran has no safeguards obligation to inform the UN agency of its activities aimed at enhancing passive defense capabilities of its nuclear facilities and establishing underground workshops to relocate some activities to new locations. But it has still notified the agency of all of its measures, the press TV report reads. He said Iran is being fully transparent, blaming the Israeli-affiliated media for creating a false atmosphere regarding their peaceful nuclear program. He further denounced the IAEA for failing to condemn Israeli attacks on their civilian program. The Iranian foreign minister said Tehran remains committed to results-oriented talks while calling on Washington to abandon its sanctions lunacy. This was on Friday after the new sanctions had already been announced. Rafael Grossi, the Director General of the IAEA, urged Iran to return to talks before things get much more problematic. And the Atomic Energy Organization of Iran spokesman responded saying, focus on technical duties instead of adopting a politicized approach. All right. Now, here's where it's getting really interesting. I think the Iranians are calling Biden's bluff, and the Americans have still yet to respond, but this is very important. So Iran has dropped its call for the IRGC to be delisted from the Foreign Terrorist Organization blacklist. Iran has reportedly now formally dropped the demand for the IRG FTO delisting in hopes of reviving the nuclear deal. There is talk that they still want U.S. sanctions against it's an economic arm of the IRGC, and a few other entities dropped. But, overall, they have made this major concession. And the U.S. has yet to respond, but the offer is described as a middle way. On Wednesday, Ned Price said Tehran needs to decide to drop issues that are extraneous to the JCPOA. We believe that if Iran makes this political decision, we'll be in a position to conclude and to pursue a mutual return to compliance with the JCPOA very swiftly. Now, now I guess we're going to see if that's the case now. Now, Washington has emphasized that if Iran seeks extraneous concessions, it needs to offer concessions beyond the JCPOA itself, such as agreeing not to target each other's officials. Apparently, such an agreement was on the table, with both sides considering the agreement in exchange for the IRGC delisting. But when Washington wanted to make the agreement public, Tehran's hardliners backed off because it would be too politically expensive domestically in light of the promise to seek revenge against those who killed General Soleimani and to avenge him. Now, this was confirmed to Middle East Eye by an Iranian political analyst speaking on the condition of anonymity. Enrique Mora's Tehran visit last month also included passing along a message from the U.S. side that Iran would not be able to remove the IRGC from the FTO list as part of the JCPOA revival deal, but that it could be negotiated in the future. On June 8th, Iran's foreign ministry said their foreign minister said Tehran put a new offer on the table. without adding details. He warned Iran would react harshly if a U.S. E3 resolution against Iran was passed at the upcoming Board of Governors IAEA meeting, which of course it was. The political analyst said, quote, "The U.S. seems to be playing for time, as they know Iran has economic troubles." He also noted that this decision to drop the IRGC delisting demand would be extremely politically costly for Raisi. Now, U.S. senators say the new Iran deal is unlikely. So senators in both parties were recently briefed by senior Biden administration officials. The senators are coming out saying they don't believe a deal will be revived while blaming Iran. The administration says they have a deal on the table, but they don't expect Iran to accept it. It's not clear what the U.S. offer is yet, but Tehran appears to be trying to get back to the table by dropping their demand for the IRGC to be removed from the FTO list. All right, so Iran is blaming the U.S. for the delays, however, and they say that nuclear talks have still not been derailed. So talks to revive the JCPOA are still stalled, but even in the face of the new sanctions, the Iranian Foreign Ministry is addressing the matter, saying it's committed to the diplomatic path, and Tehran is prepared to reach a good deal. The Iranian position is that it is Washington that's choosing to delay and prolong the process. Saeed Khodaei told reporters, "We are still moving on the diplomatic path. The train has still not been derailed despite the U.S. reneging on its commitments and in spite of all of its actions." He adds, "We can certainly and quickly finalize the agreement if the U.S. agrees to put aside all the sanctions. Even today, we are ready to return to Vienna to reach a good deal if Washington fulfills its commitments." These statements contrast with the U.S. narrative that they've put a deal on the table they don't expect Tehran to accept, putting all the blame on Iran's side. Khodaei said Monday the U.S. decided again to prolong and delay the agreement and went to the IAEA Board of Governors meeting with the delusion of using leverage. Of course, the response by Iran was proportionate and decisive. Iran maintains hopes by all appearances as the Europeans continue to try to revive the process. Not much seems to be changing on the American side, however. Placating Israel and Saudi Arabia remains the priority. So Iran has informed the IAEA now of a plan to increase enrichment with new centrifuges. Reuters reported on a new confidential IAEA report that shows some of the things Iran has been doing in response to the censure at the Board of Governors meeting this month. The report details, I'll just add, that's the way it's being sort of portrayed in reports, but as I said, I believe last week, the IR6 centrifuges, I mean, these ones may be new, but the IAEA already knew that they were putting IR6 centrifuges at Fordo, or building new ones. So Reuters reported on this new confidential report that shows some of the things Iran has done in response to the censure. The report details Tehran's plans to install new advanced IR6 centrifuges at the underground Fordo enrichment site. The agency is still seeking clarification, but the report says the new centrifuges are meant to be able to switch between levels and are able to go easily from 5 to 20% enrichment. The IAEA doesn't know what level they will be used for initially, though some states are raising concerns about the ease of the changing enrichment levels, the ease of switching them. There is no proliferation risk, however. These levels of enrichment are far below the 90% needed for weapons grade, and there is nothing illegal going on here, although the JCPOA doesn't allow uranium enrichment at Fordo. But as with the other retaliatory measures since the Board of Governors rebuke, this month, Iran has emphasized all these steps are easily reversible if a new nuclear deal is reached. So Iran is now reporting as well that three men in a Mossad-linked assassination cell have been arrested back in April, and they are now going to be put on trial. So Iran's judiciary says 3 men of unidentified nationality linked to the Mossad who were involved in plans to assassinate nuclear scientists have been arrested and will be soon put on trial. They say the 3 were involved in a plot in Sistan, Baluchistan province, and because of the vague details of the Iranian media reports, it's unclear if this was a massive assassination cell involved in numerous plots or just a small group and possibly one of many. Now, we have another report here. Israel is keeping the U.S. in the dark on its covert attacks inside Iran. So again, more official recognition of what's been going on with this ramped up assassination program. So a CNN report citing current and former U.S. officials says Israel is escalating its attacks on Iran's nuclear sites and scientists while keeping Washington largely in the dark on these covert operations. CNN reported a U.S. official and another source briefed on the intelligence that confirmed Israel was behind the assassination of Colonel Hassan Sayyad Khodaei, as was previously reported in the New York Times. The report adds that Tel Aviv has kept the Biden administration in the dark, neither updating officials beforehand nor discussing its role after the fact. In response to Tel Aviv's recent drone strikes inside Iran, Tehran has raised its aerospace defense fort alert levels. This is a possible indication that they intend to respond to and retaliate against Israeli strikes, officials told CNN. The CNN report says the U.S. has taken a hands-off approach regarding the Israeli attacks and hasn't directly asked them to stop. The report could be seen as U.S. officials attempting to absolve Washington of involvement in or responsibility for the attacks despite their obvious tacit support. These escalations come ahead of Biden's Middle East trip, where he'll visit Saudi Arabia and Israel. A crucial part of the visit will be increasing regional cooperation against Iran. Israeli Defense Minister Benny Gantz, of course, revealed that Israel is working with Arab countries to build a new U.S.-backed anti-Iran military alliance in the region. Biden is expected to push for more Arab involvement in Israel's alliance at the GCC summit in Jeddah in Saudi Arabia next month. He will hold a separate meeting with Mohammed bin Salman, which Israeli officials are said to have pushed for. Now, as the Iran talks stall, Iran is pursuing regional diplomacy as the U.S. is building up this alliance against Iran. And we're even saying there might be, well, there's a report in the Wall Street Journal that recently said that it's not a question of if, but when the Riyadh and Tel Aviv will publicly improve their relations. And that's expected to be a big part of this trip. Now, Raisi's two primary foreign policy goals have been salvaging the JCPOA and building better relations with Iran's neighbors. As the talks on the deal stall, they are focusing on the latter. Iran has hosted 3 presidents this month, including the leaders of Venezuela, Turkmenistan, and Kazakhstan. Iran has visits with Syria, Turkey, and Qatar, either coming or just wrapping up. The primary focus, however, is expected to be with China and Russia, both major powers who have aligned with Tehran on the nuclear talks and have shown willingness to veto UN resolutions against Iran. All right. And then as far as what's been going on in Syria, there was a recent strike about 2 weeks ago where the Israelis destroyed the only working runway at the Damascus International Airport. And this was a strike that came from the occupied Golan Heights. And then shortly after this, again, in another escalation against Iran and Syria, the U.S., in this report at the Wall Street Journal, has secretly it's being reported that they are secretly reviewing and approving many of the Israeli airstrikes. So a report from the Wall Street Journal says Tel Aviv is secretly coordinating with the U.S. on many of its airstrikes in Syria. Senior officials at CENTCOM have reviewed and approved many plans in recent years. The latest Israeli airstrikes in Syria, as I said, attacked the Damascus International Airport. And I believe they wanted to have the repairs finished by the 20th of this month, although I don't know if that's been the case. I haven't seen any additional reporting on it. And it's pretty devastating when you read the quotes from even the construction workers who the prime minister there visited recently and encouraged them to continue on with the work. But they're saying, of course we need the airport, but how could anybody do this, to civilian infrastructure like this? How could you destroy our airport? And who's to say you won't just do this again as soon as we're finished and the airport is back up and running again? Now, current and former officials told the Wall Street Journal that the main focus of coordination is on airstrikes that pass the Al-Tanf garrison, a U.S. military base in southern Syria on the border with Jordan near the border with Jordan and Iraq. And officials say the vast majority of strikes are approved. Israel started flying the airstrikes through Al-Tanf in 2017 to avoid Syrian air defenses. They notify CENTCOM of the plans ahead of time for review, and they also notify the Secretary of Defense is also notified, as well as the Joint Chiefs chairman. Israel has also notified Russian forces at their Kanaim air base of the planned strikes as well. And this is not now. What's interesting though that they note in the report is that the strikes. This is mostly dealing with strikes in eastern Syria, not the strikes in the west where where they struck the airport and they often bombed the capital Damascus. But this is mostly focusing on eastern Syria, which that may also be, of course, because the U.S. occupies a great part, roughly a third of northeastern Syria with the Kurdish, the U.S.-backed Kurdish forces there. So again, just continuing the devastation of the country. I know there was a report recently that Dave DeCamp had as well that the Kurds have essentially they've prevented farmers from being able to sell wheat to government-controlled territories, and so the Assyrian government is offering premiums to farmers who are willing to get around the restrictions, but it is reportedly breaking the back of the farmers there who are already, of course, under siege and the sanctions and preventing Syria from rebuilding. So it's just been absolutely devastating. But that is everything I have today. The most important thing about the article, I think, what I did was essentially taking the timeline and putting it all together and showing how the latest Israeli assassination campaign really picked up, particularly after Enrique Mora's trip to Tehran, where he was sent by Joseph Borrell, the EU foreign policy chief, to try and break the deadlock over the IRGC issue. And a few days later, and also the Emir of Qatar was there as well, pushing for progress, meeting with Ayatollah Ali Khamenei and President Ibrahim Raisi. And, a few days later, after Mora arrived in Tehran, Borrell announced that everything had gone better than expected, that the talks had been reopened, and that a final deal was within reach. Now, at the same time, shortly after, Benny Gantz is in Washington meeting with National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan and his counterpart at the Pentagon, Lloyd Austin. And when he arrived back in Israel, Khodaei had already been killed. And he was saying, they told me they're not taking the IRGC off this list. And since then, Israel has killed potentially 5 more people. I mean, certainly the quadcopter drone strike was most likely then the one on the Parchin military complex that killed a young engineer. And of course, the poisonings of the aerospace engineer Ayoub Entezari and the geologist as well. And then there were subsequently 2 IRGC members who work in the aerospace industry who were martyred and died in mysterious accidents, described as martyrdoms. And, I also point out that, of course, they're focusing on the drone program, which is interesting because, there have been efforts, bipartisan efforts actually in the House by people like Gregory Meeks, Michael McCall last year to ramp up sanctions on Iran, and how they were talking about it's their drone program we have to focus on. And of course, Bennett was hyping up, or the Israelis anyway, it may have been Gantz, but they were throwing around this term UAV terror. And that basically Iran has this global drone campaign, and that they're giving all these drones to Hezbollah and to the Houthis and Hamas and all this, and they're attacking Israel. That's why you have to look at when they say stuff in the New York Times report, when they go, well, the American officials are concerned about their drone program, and they're using this to attack Israel and Saudi Arabia. I mean, again, if they're talking about the drone strikes on Saudi Arabia coming from Yemen, that's the Houthis. That's not Iran. I mean, Iran may help them in emails or something, telling them maybe this is how you would build the drones or whatever. But I mean, these are drones that are being built in Yemen that are being deployed by the Houthis, and they have every motive and every reason to do that. They're just retaliating for the genocidal war waged against their people. It's and then of course the Israeli thing, when you read Israeli media and they talk about this and they try to hype it up, they're like, well, there was an incident, I believe earlier this, in the beginning of the year, where I guess a reconnaissance drone, a quadcopter reconnaissance drone that Hezbollah had flew somewhere within like 43 miles of Israeli occupied territory, and the Iron Dome sent an interceptor missile, or they missed. And they sent their military jets to fly over Beirut, and they scrambled and all this, and it was ridiculous. I mean, the quadcopter drone is the size of a laptop, and again, they were just collecting intelligence, but and Hezbollah reportedly took responsibility for this, of course, after the planes flew over Beirut and all this. But that's, I mean, it's not the same thing, of course, as what Israel is doing in Iran, killing people and destroying military sites and attacking nuclear facilities. So, it's just more and more projection, of course. And the other thing I do in the article is showing that what you'll see when you read any of the mainstream reports now is they will basically admit that, yes, Israel is killing people at this alarming rate inside Iran. However, they argue it's because they're ramping up their nuclear program. Well, the reason they do that is because Israel is killing so many Iranians and attacking their nuclear program. And this has been going on now, especially for the last couple of years. But the other thing is they go, they also say that, well, Iran has this global campaign. They're trying to kidnap and kill Israeli civilians and politicians and officials all over the world, particularly in Istanbul. Oh God, thank the Lord that these Israelis made it out of Istanbul, made it out of Turkey with their lives still intact, because the Iranians are trying to kill any Israeli they can find. They were knocking on doors in hotels, and we told people don't answer the door and all this stuff. It's really ridiculous. But you're seeing the main thing that you're seeing right now is that they're ramping up this propaganda about Israel having this supposed campaign to assassinate Israelis around the world. And that started in the beginning of May. They were putting out unsourced reports where they're like, the article that I link in there, you can trace it back. There's a piece in the South China Morning Post where they go, I'm not going to get all this exactly right, but they're like, we caught I think they said an IRGC officer involved in this campaign. He had been given $150,000 to kill Israelis, and he was to be given $1 million after that if he, carried out the mission. And we interrogated him, we kidnapped him, interrogated him, and dropped him off in another country. But that's how we found this out. They were trying to kill a U.S. general, I think they said in Germany too. But of course, none of this is verified. It's all just, Israel, again, making up, for all intents and purposes, lies about Iran and of course, this was, it's not enough. Apparently, in that political report where Biden said a couple days after they killed Khodaei, where the political report came out and they said, oh, Biden has made his final decision to not remove the IRGC from the FTO list. They said, that he had told Bennett about that a month prior. Maybe that's true. Maybe it isn't. What is interesting, though, is that Israel obviously wasn't confident that they were not going to negotiate that anyway. So I think that's one of the reasons why they, at least at first, started making up these lies about the IRGC trying to kill Israelis concurrently, while Blinken was running around crying about how they're trying to kill Mike Pompeo and Brian Hook, Trump's former Iran envoy. So this is, they all sort of are working together. If you look at as well, with the move by the Abraham Accords caucus to integrate these air and missile defense systems with Israel and these Arab states, particularly the Abraham Accord states, but also other states that haven't even normalized with Israel, like Oman and Kuwait and Iraq and Saudi Arabia. We see CENTCOM at the same time, pushing this strategy as well. It's one of the main priorities of the new CENTCOM chief, Michael Kurilla, who in his confirmation hearings was talking about how this is the greatest, opportunity is to really integrate here. And now we know that Israel, as Benny Gantz said recently, that over the last year, we have been working with our partners at the Pentagon and the administration to, build. He publicly unveiled this Middle East Air Defense Alliance, this military alliance with Israel and these unnamed Arab states. And he says more details about this are going to be forthcoming during Biden's trip to the Middle East next month. So, they're building. I mean, it's not just, conjecture at this point or something Bennett suggested to Biden last year in the Oval Office meeting in August. This is a real, this has been implemented, and apparently it's been going on for about a year. I mean, of course, they're, revealing, as I said, with the stuff going on in Syria, more and more, they're being much more open about the cooperation with Israel and the U.S., and then also with these Abraham Accords states. And of course, obviously this doesn't bode well for the JCPOA, because the greatest threat to justifying all of this, all these special interests that are involved, whether it's the military-industrial complex, the Israel lobby, CENTCOM, Israel itself, these Gulf states who want more and more weapons and more, and there's even talk about providing security guarantees to the UAE, and so there's all these vested interests. But if they have the JCPOA, obviously that's the greatest threat to it, because it spoils the whole racket. You can't. There's a reason why all this got implemented after Trump left the deal and escalated tensions with Iran so much. So it does seem to me that Biden is really taking and running with Trump's policy and really implementing what the neoconservatives have wanted for a long time. Not necessarily regime change. Those are more hardline neocons who want to see something like that. But certainly what's going on right now could very easily lead to war, or a miscalculation with all the escalations going on that in all of Israel's attacks. We've yet to really see an Iranian response, although Gantz claims, we've this new alliance, we've intercepted Iranian attacks against Israel and other Arab states. Of course, there's no proof of any of that. But, this could all really spiral out of control very fast. So we'll have to see, especially what Biden announces here coming up soon.
All right, Connor, thanks so much for that. And this is what his trip is less than a month away now. I guess when we will be at in Las Vegas for Freedom Fest, Biden will be partying it up in Israel, celebrating new alliances with the war contractors. But that is a good reminder to take a minute to say that the Libertarian Institute and antiwar.com will be at Freedom Fest, and very excited to be a part of that, as I'm sure you are as well, Connor. So,
absolutely. Can't wait.
Anyways, let's wrap it up there. Thanks so much for coming back on the show, Connor, and we will do this again next week.
Awesome. Thank you, everybody.